Well, welcome everybody. I'm Dave Steimers and I want to welcome you to Westside Church, our online service for this week. Really glad that you're here with us, and we hope that you had a good break last week. We had a midsummer break and we took a bit of a Sabbath. We hope it was a time for you to recharge a little bit, maybe connect with some people that you love and that you're ready for so many exciting things ahead. Today we have a really important service for you. I know that most of us have probably heard in the news over the last few months about the recent discoveries of mass graves that are connected to residential schools. And it's been a reminder for us of some of the very dark and horrific history and the treatment of Indigenous people here in Canada. And we think it's really important for us as followers of Jesus to grieve and to mourn with those who have hurt and continue to hurt, and for us to take an opportunity to learn a little bit more about how we can best respond to some of these very difficult things that we know are part of our history here in Canada. And so today we have some amazing resources that we want to share with you. You're going to hear from Cheryl Bear. She's got a message that is just so awesome, and from the perspective of someone who's part of the Indigenous community. Cheryl Bear is multi-talented. She is an award-winning singer and songwriter, and so you're also going to hear some of her music, which you're going to love. And she just shares a little bit about her heart as a person who grew up a First Nations person and also a Christian, and sharing how those things come together and teaching us a little bit about how we can respond. Cheryl Bear is active in helping to grow up leaders and to tackle some of these issues. She's also an associate professor at Regent College out in BC, and I know you're going to benefit so much from her message. The message was originally recorded for Southridge Community Church, which is just down in St. Catharines, and we've been blessed with them giving us permission to share that with you. We also have a resource from Bruxy Cavey, who's the teaching pastor at the Meeting House, and he offers us an apology, and I think it's a really great way to model as followers of Christ humility and a way of offering an apology, not because some of us maybe we weren't directly involved in some of these things, but we do want to acknowledge that we are the indirect beneficiaries of some people being treated very poorly, and other people therefore benefiting off of that. And so we hope that you'll just take that as a great model of humility, and I think it'll be really good for us. So we hope that you enjoy these resources. More than that you'll learn from them, and afterwards I'll be back on to share with you some important announcements for what's coming up at Westside Church. So take a look and enjoy.
Hari Suanda, Cheryl Bear Slee, Nadleh Whut'en First. My name is Cheryl Bear, and I'm from the beautiful village of Nadleh Whut'en, and I am so grateful to be here with you. And we're here to talk today about racism in Canada. This is a big topic, and I'm really grateful to be called upon to discuss this with you today and to share some of my thoughts about it. The usual response to the topic of racism in Canada is often, what does that have to do with us? We're not racist. We're fine. And so I am grateful that you guys are tackling this and trying to dig a little bit deeper. So I mentioned where I'm from. My Indigenous community is Nadleh Whut'en. It's located in central British Columbia. We used to be called the Carrier Nation, and that's because the French fur traders said we were really good at carrying heavy loads for long distances. And I think that they were prophetic. I think our people definitely have carried heavy loads for a long time. I'd like to also acknowledge that the place that I'm at, the land that I'm on, is the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations. And I'd like to thank them for letting us do our business here on their land. The land acknowledgement is an important first step in the journey of reconciliation. And sometimes I call it like a baby's first step, because it just to exemplify how long this journey is going to be, and that it's going to take most of our lives to be on it. But it's an important step. And that is because it makes everything real. I remember being in grade 6 in, that's when you do Indigenous content in schools. And of course I'm 51 now. So back in the day, my teacher said, oh, this term we're going to study Indians in Canada. And I was one of 2 Native students in the class, and I was excited. I thought, oh, hey, this is about us. We kind of looked at each other and we were like, that's cool. But then within seconds, the teacher said, studying Indians in Canada. And then, oh, we're going to study the Hurons in Eastern Canada. And I was kind of bewildered, like, I'd never heard of them. But he answered right away. He said, but we think they're probably extinct. And you know, I've since met a few, and actually Wendake is beautiful, and troubling that those words were said. But I remember kind of feeling like, and looking back on that experience now, I kind of felt like I was just sort of rendered invisible. And that's the art of former Canadian curriculum in Canada. And it was to take your eyes off the land that is right in front of you, to take your mind off of that and just make Indigenous people something somewhere far, far away and probably not existent anymore. And that way it's much, much easier to objectify and to take. And so the story that's been written about Indigenous people in Canada is one that is mostly derogatory. If you go back and look at news articles over the years, centuries, and the early writings of the explorers and so on, you'll find a lot of derogatory statements. And basically we're talked about as if we're dumb or scary. And so when you think about that and you think, oh, these Native people are so simple, they don't even use the land, and so we can just take it. Or if we're scary, oh, they're savages and they're warlike and evil and all of those things, then it's much more easy to go, well, they don't deserve the land. So those are 2 of the ways that we've been written about. We're continue to be written about today. And some of those misconceptions, we kind of think as people in the church, we kind of think, oh, but at least that's out there, that's politics, and that has nothing to do with inside the church. But I grew up I've been a Christian since I was 8 years old, and I've experienced a lot of racism in the church over the years. But it's disguised. It's disguised as spirituality or proper doctrine. And so one of the questions that I got when I was a teenager, somebody came up to me and said, hey, you're Native. And I was like, yeah, I'm Native. And I said, I'm from Nadleh. And I've always been very proud of being from Nadleh. I never denied where I was from, even though I knew that as soon as I said where I'm from, that the person's countenance would change. Their brow would furrow and they would get very pensive. And this happened in this situation as well. And this person said, oh, there's a lot of darkness in your community, isn't there? And I was like a teenager, like, how do I respond to that? This person is an adult, and this person is supposed to know, more about God than me. So I guess our land is more dark, is my conclusion. And then, like, today, I wish I could go back in time and just answer that question. There's a lot of darkness in your community, right? And I wish I could say yes, at night. And the next question that I got was, I was wearing some Native earrings, some beaded earrings. They were beautiful, and somebody noticed, hey, those are Native earrings. And I was like, yes, hey, I'm a teenage girl, right? Of course I'm going to be happy somebody notices. But then the person said, oh, don't those have evil spirits? And immediately, then again, and both of these comments, they put something onto me, that my land is dark and that my earrings are demonic. It put something on me as a Native person that there must be something wrong with me, wrong with my people, and wrong with my land in order for these comments to be coming at me. And oh darn, what do you have to do with that? What do you do with those comments? Well, it's a very subtle form of racism, that systemic racism that's riding through there. And the goal of that is assimilation. And this has been the goal since explorers first came to this land. There's something called the Christian doctrine of discovery. And the doctrine of discovery was an edict from the monarchs in Europe who said to the explorers, when you go out and you find land, and if you do not find a recognized monarch, and those are the words specific, recognized monarch, then consider the land terra nullius or terra nullius. The land is empty. and therefore they could take the land if they wanted to. And so, and that's a Christian doctrine. And that's the foundation of Canada and the United States. And unfortunately, there were shortly after that, because they found, of course, Indigenous people here. And so then you can read back in history, many of the accounts, they talk about these debates that they would have with different popes, different religious leaders, and of course, the monarchy or leadership. They had debates as to whether or not Indigenous people had a soul. Now, this so bothers me because as an Indigenous person and having Indigenous ancestry, this hurts me to hear this kind of talk. And when I first started reading some of this history and learning about this history, I was quite shocked. One of the reasons why they were having these debates is because if we had a soul, then they were obligated to send missionaries. But if we didn't have a soul, they could just exterminate us. And so that's the devastating part about all of this. And this is kind of the thing you don't read about in the history books. So they had a pope who decided, yes, they have a soul, and so therefore we have to send missionaries. So then came the next phase of the goal of assimilation and extermination, eventually extermination. That's always been the goal for Indigenous people in Canada, that the government has wanted to deal with the Indian problem. There are piles and piles of evidence of papers written between government officials back and forth who talked about this, who were trying to figure out ways to deal with and to get rid of Native people. And so this is not a new problem. Racism isn't new. It's just something that's kind of been with us all along. And it's not easy to talk about, because I talked, about my earlier experiences in church, and we kind of think, well, that maybe that's all gone now. Maybe that's not an issue anymore, because who would ask those questions in churches today? They're still being asked in churches today. And these are, I remember one pastor friend of mine who's Native, and he was speaking in a church in Canada, and after he spoke, somebody came up to him and said, "Wow, I didn't know Indians could be Christians." And another Native pastor friend of mine who was speaking in a church, like guest speaking, both of these situations, in a church in the U.S., and somebody came up to that person after and said, "Wow, I didn't know Indians could be intelligent." And so these misconceptions, there's so many. There's actually a book out of the United States, I think the University of Arizona, and it's a Native author who's talking about stereotypes about Native people, and they just go one by one through the stereotypes and break them down into how they're so not true. And we have to talk about these things. My experience of just these sort of like things that happen in church, they happen in society. In church, maybe we can sort of disguise them. We can sort of disguise them as, like I said, spirituality. But in the real world, when you're faced with police issues, police matters, it gets to be a little bit more dangerous. And we're all talking about this because of what happened with George Floyd in the United States, and what some are calling the riots, but what I would prefer to call the rebellion, the uprising, because I think every single one of us, and it sounds like your church, in all of the efforts and all the effort that you're putting into learning about racism in our own land here. We're sick of it. I think you guys are with me. We're just so done with this police violence, and I think we're asking better questions. You know, I don't hear too often people saying, you know, well, actually, you hear this, maybe I'm not listening anymore. I have to block out some of these voices that are saying, if only, you know, they, you know, people of color, or Black or Indigenous people of color would just stop resisting arrest, or would just, you know, stop committing crimes, then everything would be great. But if you look at the evidence, then we'll find the overwhelmingly it lines up on in color lines, and yeah. So George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. We know these names from the news, even though they're not even in our country. But we've been made aware of them because of people taking to the streets and protesting police violence. But there's other names that I need you to hear as well, because one of the news agencies reported that there were 8 Indigenous people murdered by police since April 8th. And that's Chantel Moore. She's Nuu-chah-nulth. She was one of the, shot 5 times in New Brunswick. Rodney Levy, who's Mi'kmaq. Aisha Hudson, Jason Collins, Kevin Andrews, all from the Winnipeg area. Abraham Natanine, who's from way up north. Regis Paquette in Toronto. And Everett Patrick, who is BC. I believe he's from Babine. And there are some news articles as well in, I should talk a little bit more about these names. These are loved ones. These are our daughters and sons, brothers, sisters, dads, moms, grandchildren. And it hurts to know that that these things are happening. It hurts us to know that and again, for the situation in the United States, where you have this huge uprising for Mr. George Floyd, and that, like I said, we all looked at that and we were all like, that's it, we're all done. And then we start to look within ourselves, within our own, where we live, and then we realize, oh my goodness, this is happening here as well. And I've often said that there are 2 realities in Canada. There's one where for Indigenous people and how Indigenous people are treated, and then there's another one for Euro-Canadian background people. And if you're, a lot of these news stories that we share, you know, they're a part of us. I have heard these stories since I was a teenager. You know, there was a young man I went to school with from a nation or a village not far from mine, who was shot by police. And I remember being a 16-year-old and thinking, oh my goodness, like, how could that have happened? Like, I was just shocked and stunned. This kid that I knew from school, from Prince George College, where a lot of the Native kids were bussed in and lived. It was shocking. So this is not abnormal for Indigenous people to hear these things. To hear that a friend or a relative has been murdered or died in police custody. This is not abnormal, but it is in non-Indigenous communities. It seems to be more prevalent that it's, you know, it's unheard of. Some of you guys would have never known anybody who's assaulted or lost their lives to police violence, because there are 2 realities in Canada. And some of those things going back to our roots with the doctrine of discovery, the Christian doctrine of discovery, where the systemic racism is, and I guess sometimes we don't recognize it because it's such a prevalent part of our lives. It's a normal part, and so when you start hearing stories from Indigenous people about the atrocities that happen, just like when you heard about the residential school, when you heard about that in 2008, when the apology was given, I'm sure you had the same reaction as everyone in Canada, and you were like, how could this have happened? This is so wrong. How come we never knew about it? And that is because someone was controlling the story. Someone was hiding the story, and it was the residential school survivors. Sorry, I lost my mic. It was the residential school survivors themselves who had to win a class action suit in order to get justice for our people. And so the same way you're learning about this now, and the tough part is that we want to just look away. We want to just say, when we see these videos, we want to just say, oh, this is too traumatic. I can't watch anymore. But I ask you, I beg you, don't look away, because we can't. We have to face these situations so often. And we have a national inquiry into the murdered and missing Indigenous women. And I can tell you that if you asked a Native person, do you know missing or murdered Indigenous woman, they would probably say no. I don't only know just one. And that's definitely my case. I have to stop counting after one hand, because I start to lose my mind a little bit with the pain and trauma of that. And so what does the Bible have to say about race? Well, when we see, one of my favorite stories is John 4, and we're talking about women and how vulnerable women can be. And the most vulnerable women in Canada are Indigenous women. And so whenever I see Jesus interacting with the woman, I'm grateful, because he seems to elevate their status. And in my reading, because he comes to in his day, of course, in ancient times, it's not like today. We can't read the Bible through the lens of our own culture, because back in those days, women didn't have any rights. Women were considered the same as property. And so women were never taught in public. And so it was just this very different way of being for women. And, they were supposed to be in the house and taking care of stuff, having kids, creating heirs, and just taking care of the household business. But very much patriarchal society. And so when Jesus in John 4 walks up to the Samaritan woman and says, "Can you give me a drink?" He breaks down a gender barrier, and he breaks down a race barrier, because she herself says immediately after his question, she says, "Why are you talking to me, a Samaritan woman?" Those two things. And I didn't know this when I was starting to go to Bible school. I never thought about how that racism could be in the Bible, or that racism could be a thing. That the Bible would sort of, have to deal with. But there it is. And so the history of the Jews and the Samaritans is not a good one. There was a lot of racial disparity, at the very least. And if a Jew was walking on the street and a Samaritan was coming towards them, they would cross the street to avoid them, because they just didn't like their beliefs and so on, felt like they were really unclean. So Jesus breaking down this race barrier is kind of showing us some things that we can do. But the first thing that Jesus does, and I try to tell people who are interested in working with Indigenous people, I always say, we don't want you to always sort of come at us with, how can I help? How can I help you? Because it insinuates that we are sort of the poor, needy ones, and, please help us, and the patronizing, whatever. We don't want that. And Jesus didn't do that either. He said, "Can you give me a glass of water?" Or a cup of water. I guess they didn't have a glass then, but I should know that from the Holy Grail. That Indiana Jones show. Anyway, so Jesus asks for help. Jesus is the one who is putting himself in the place of need. and walking alongside a person. And then that question opens up this whole conversation of the things of spirit, the things of God. And that woman goes on to become the first evangelist noted in the New Testament. And that story is encouraging to me, that Jesus would go and walk in such a humble way. And one of the things also that we find the Creator doing is not being afraid to be humble, not being afraid to become a learner, not being afraid to become a dependent. And, those things, those words might sound shocking, but how did the Creator of the universe, how did the God, this ancient being, the one with no beginning and no end, how did this one become known to humankind? Well, through the birth of Jesus, and coming to this world as a newborn baby, the picture, the ultimate picture of dependence, the ultimate picture of a learner, and I think that ability, the ability to do that, to empty oneself, and to begin again, to begin anew, with humility, to learn things. That might be what it might take for Canada to understand Indigenous issues and racism in Canada, and to begin to uproot some of these old systems that we find here, in order that we can make things equal. And that's a key word, when we talk about equal rights. We're not talking about more. We're not talking about, we want it all. Like, we're just talking about all Indigenous people want is those promises to be kept, the ancient treaties to be kept. And there's Canadians, there's new Canadians coming here, new immigrants coming to Canada all the time. And the government has this ceremony and has this teaching that they give. But I'm not sure that they say to new immigrants, I'm not sure that part of the test that they do says, did you know that you are entering into a treaty relationship with Indigenous peoples? I'm not sure that that's on there. And so it's an afterthought. And again, it's who is writing this story, who is telling this story. So I'd like to encourage you to read some Indigenous authors. There's lots of really good Christian books written by Christian authors. My late friend, my dear friend, the late Dr. Richard Twist, wrote a couple of really good books. You can Google him. The book I already mentioned, Unsettling Truths, wonderful book, and lots of others. When you Google search those, other ones will come up. So I encourage you again to listen to Indigenous people. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to learn all of these new things, and it's a journey, but it's one of unraveling some of the untruths and beginning anew to walk alongside. And Indigenous people, like I said, I think that Canada needs the help of Indigenous people. We have so much beauty. We have so many beautiful things to share, so much beautiful wisdom to share with the rest of Canada. And it's about time that started happening. So thank you for inviting me to speak. This is a big step, I believe, in your journey towards reconciliation. And so thank you again, and I look forward to talking to you again, I hope. All the best.
Darkness and despair, like a shroud, overwhelms me.
Hi, my name is Bruxy. I'm a Christian, I'm a pastor, and I want to apologize to the First Nations people of Canada. I'm apologizing as a white man, as a person of European descent, for what my people did in coming here to acquire this land. I'm primarily also apologizing as a Christian. As a Christian, I'm someone who follows Jesus, and I come from a lineage of people who claim to follow Jesus, but when it came to our relationship with the First Nations people of this country, well, we were far from living the Christ-like life. White European Christians who came to this land found that there were already multiple beautiful Indigenous nations that were here before us. That didn't stop us from finding any way we could to take over the place. Sometimes we did with direct warfare, and sometimes through treaties that we ended up breaking. Sometimes it was through trade agreements that worked only to our advantage in the long run. Whatever it took, we took over. The church facilitated unconscionable horror. It seems that when the Christian church has Jesus at the center, follows him, emulates him, and is like him, the church is one of the most beautiful forces for good on the planet. But whenever the Christian church doesn't have Jesus at the center, it becomes one of the most horrific forces that justifies terrible things. In Canada, one of the church's greatest sins against the First Nations people was our support of and participation in residential schools. Under the guise of wanting to give First Nations people a gift, the gift of education, our government, supported by the church, forcibly removed thousands upon thousands of children from their homes. This was a kind of cultural genocide, an intentional way of, through education, to uneducate or de-educate an entire generation, to destroy their own understanding of their own culture, their own language, their own heritage and history and religion. Thousands of children died throughout this century-long project, some through neglect, some through abuse, and some through suicide. The horror of the residential school project didn't stop when the schools eventually closed, because now you have generations of First Nations children who are growing up into their adulthood never having experienced family. And so today, the destruction continues, the heartache continues, and Christians have been a part of that. We have confused culture and Christ, and in order and under the banner of, with the nobility of wanting to share Jesus with people, we have rather imported our own culture, and we've done so forcibly and destroyed families. In the Bible, the book of Acts, chapter 17, the Apostle Paul takes the gospel of Jesus into a new culture. And the first thing he does when he gets there is he listens, he learns, and he pays attention. He becomes a student of their culture. He refuses to just import Jewish culture. He refuses to just import Christian culture. He instead wants to see, how has God already been at work in their culture? That's his starting point. He doesn't come as one who has all the answers. He doesn't come as one who is bringing truth into the land of error. He doesn't come as the one who is bringing light into the land of darkness. He comes as someone who is going to listen and learn and see how God has already been at work there, and then help people hear the message of Jesus within the context of their own culture, their own religion, their own beliefs, their own history and heritage. This is our example as Christians of how we're to carry the message of Jesus forward. Not through force, certainly not through deception, through breaking treaties, through imposing our will, or confusing our culture with Christ's message, but rather to go, to listen, to learn, and discern how has God already been at work through the culture that we're now being introduced to. Think of how things could have been different if Christians came to Canada, to America, to North America, to listen, learn, and discern. How has our great God already been revealing himself here? And then to say, now let's build a bridge so we can have a discussion about Jesus. Christians should know better. We should listen, learn, and see how God is at work. We don't have all the answers. In fact, when we think we do, we become a monstrous version of what the church is called to be. On behalf of the Christian Church, to the First Nations people of Canada, I ask for your forgiveness.
Well, this is such an important topic for us to have talked about, and I feel like just a small step for us to learn a little bit more and to be thinking through, as followers of Jesus, how we respond to the news that we've heard and just the continuing hurt and how we might think through what we can do in the future. So thank you for joining us and absorbing that and really prayerfully considering it. Now, I want to talk about what we have coming up here at Westside Church. If you can believe it, we're just a week and a half away from some more in-person opportunities to gather for worship. That's right, starting on August the 18th, that's a Wednesday night, we are going to be having in-person worship service. We're actually going to do 4 weeks in a row of Wednesday nights, and we would love for you to join us. We will have a capacity limit, and so we're asking that you register ahead of time. You can do that by going to our website, and you'll see there where you can register for any 4 or all 4 of those worship nights. And we would love for you to join us as we come together and sing and hear a message. We will continue to have services here on YouTube as well, so that you won't miss out if you can't make it or aren't comfortable yet joining us. Now, as we come together for those services, and I'm really excited to have services in person again, I just want to remind you that our ultimate goal is not just to regather for attending services, but to regather to build a community. And that's been our heartbeat. You've been hearing about this all summer. Hopefully this is not a surprise to you at this point. And you've been hearing about our Committed to Community fundraising campaign. We're trying to raise the funds to be able to raise a new, to hire a new pastoral staff member who can help us drive that vision and make these dreams a reality. And so one of our goals has been to raise our monthly giving by $3,000. And if you think about it, that might be 30 of us committing to giving $100 more, or starting to give $100 a month to make this happen. And that might seem like a big step for you, and there might be others of us where we could do even more than that. But if we could just imagine we all came together and made that commitment, then we could really make this happen. And the Apostle Paul, when he talks about the generosity of churches, he makes a powerful statement in 2 Corinthians chapter 9. Speaking of God, he says, "He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way to be generous in every way, which through us will produce thanksgiving to God." And isn't that an amazing thing? He reminds us that we can trust God because God gives us everything. And in fact, God's the one who's going to give us the resources for us to be generous. And then when we step out in faith to be generous, God's going to be the one to give us a harvest. And I believe we're going to see a harvest that's going to look like a community going deeper with one another and going wider out into our communities to make an impact for the kingdom of God. So we're so excited for that. And I'd love to encourage you to continually pray about how you might participate. And if you would like to pledge to this campaign, you can do that by using the link in the video description and just filling out a quick form for us, which will help us to know where we're at. And if you'd like to start giving or to increase your monthly giving, you can do that online through our website by simply clicking the Give button and following the instructions for a recurring gift there. And we just can't wait to be celebrating all that God has done through our generosity in this campaign. Finally, on Sunday, next Sunday, we're looking forward to starting a brand new series. It's called The Pace of Grace. And we're actually going to be working through the book of Ephesians and looking at how living in the rhythms of grace can really transform our lives. And it's essential to who we are as followers of Jesus. So I think you're going to be blessed by that. And I hope you'll join us then. In the meantime, have an amazing week. And we'll see you back here next Sunday on YouTube at 10 a.m. See you then.